tensions on the Korean Peninsula show no sign of letting up. So what are some possible solutions to the seemingly solutionless situation? For insights, we are joined this week by the former director of the Peace Research Institute Oslo, Stein Tønnesson. Stein Tønnesson, a renowned Norwegian peace researcher and historian. With his interest in East Asian affairs and world peace, he is actively involved in academic research on the topics. He was the director of the Peace Research Institute Oslo for almost a decade, where he formed a basis of international peace studies. He is currently leader of the East Asian Peace Program, a long-term project based out of Uppsala University, Sweden. Mr. Tønnesson, thank you very much for being on the program.
My pleasure.
Let's begin with those tensions on the Korean Peninsula. When you look at the situation here being what it is, what do you trace back to as being the cause of this crisis?
Well, the cause is simply the division of Korea after the Second World War, the creation of two states instead of one for one nation. And then this was exacerbated by the Korean War from 1950 to 53. One of the absolutely worst wars that we've had in the world since the Second World War. Since then it's become, in a way, even worse because one country has reached prosperity, while the other one is now one of the world's absolutely poorest nations. So the division between the countries is also a division between an integrated, globalized South Korea and an isolated, insecure, poor North Korea.
And I mentioned we would talk about some solutions. That's a loaded question, of course, and a very hard question to answer. What do you see, though, as being some possible solutions to that very, very wide division?
Of course, a solution is national reunification, which is something that is wanted on both sides. But that's not immediately on the cards. The main solution, as I see it, is simply reform in North Korea. The North Korean government must feel sufficiently secure to generate economic and social reforms so it can follow the lead of other countries in East Asia and also achieve its part of prosperity.
As a scholar who, of course, has studied international peace, I'm wondering if you have any comment on the press. There is some criticism out there that by covering all of the rhetoric and all of the provocations, in doing so, they're actually adding fuel to the tensions. What would you say to that?
I think that's true, that it is adding fuel, but I don't think I can blame the press for it, because I have actually been surprised myself to see the enormous interest that is out there in the world among the viewers and the readers and the bloggers for North Korea. This includes my own country, Norway, where many people were scared and thought that there would be war even in Norway when we had the threats recently from North Korea. So the press and media respond to that situation. But it must be a responsibility for responsible political leaders to tackle this in a way that does not make it possible for the North Korean regime to play on this media and just stir up new trouble.
And to that point, it seems that Kim Jong-un is very adept at playing and manipulating the media a little bit, much more so than his father Kim Jong-il and his grandfather Kim Il-sung. What do you make of that?
Maybe, and that I don't really know the answer to that. I don't know if it's him who is good at it, or if it's some advisors, a new generation of media savage advisors, or if perhaps he was simply lucky. I lean towards the last. I think perhaps that when the campaign with all the threats was launched by Kim Jong-un in connection with the birthday of his grandfather, that the reason for all of this was more internal to North Korea. This is a young leader. He is the son of his father and the grandson of his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and he needs to show the population that he is their leader. Then the best means to do that in a situation where you have extreme poverty is to, in a way, whip up threats, and we are strong and we can again act against all those others who are threatening us. When he did that, I think he did not probably know in advance that that would cause so much attention internationally. So this may have come as a surprise.
An unintended consequence of the action there.
That's my guess. I'm not sure that it was not planned, but I guess that it was not.
In talking about the North Korean nuclear issue, we've been talking about that as an issue for about 20 years now. What is your sense of the measures being taken by the international community, the sanctions? Why have they not been effective in keeping North Korea from pursuing its nuclear ambitions?
We must, this has been going on for a long time. And also, there were times when North Korea seemed to be willing to do something effective, like closing down the Jongnam plant, now under reconstruction again. But North Korea always sensed in these talks that it had something to gain from having nuclear weapons. And if there has been a change in recent years in North Korean behavior, I think it's more in the direction of being absolutely sure that they must have nuclear weapons. This is their way of getting attention, and it gives them a sense of security. And they have seen what has happened to other governments that were not respected or tolerated by Western countries and whose leaders are now dead. So this poses a great dilemma. I think that if we focus uniquely on the nuclear issue, we're going to see a repetition over and over again of crisis talks, crisis talks, crisis talks. So the clue is to try to tone that down while staying firm, and then open up engagement or rapprochement in other directions.
A model that the international community would like to see North Korea take is one similar to what Myanmar has done recently with their reforms, complete turnaround in relations there between those two. What is the lesson to be learned there when we look at Myanmar?
Well, one country after the other in East Asia have gone through dramatic change at some point in the history. It started with Japan right after the Second World War, absolute misery, crisis, and then economic reforms, and it became a miracle. South Korea has done the same. China did it under Deng Xiaoping. Now Myanmar is trying the same. Maybe it will be successful. This is exactly what North Korea needs as well. In Myanmar, there was a kind of, they had more regime security than North Korea, at least from the external world. Myanmar does not fear other countries as much as North Korea does. Also, Myanmar is not divided in two. It has a lot of ethnic cleavages that Korea does not really, but it is not divided in two. So I think the main reason why North Korea has not done the same thing that others have done so successfully, and that Myanmar is also now doing, is the fear that the regime would fall apart and there would be reunification on completely South Korean terms.
Perhaps a better comparison then would be to Germany. That is sort of the model that people look at when they talk about reunification. What would be the lesson there, I suppose?
This has been much discussed here in Korea. I remember that many were worried that you would get a sudden reunification on South Korean terms because that would be so expensive. It was expensive for the West Germans. But I think we must remember two things about the German reunification. One thing is that this was a reunification on Western terms. East Germany disappeared as a regime. North Korea has seen that. It doesn't want the same fate. The other thing we should notice is that the German reunification followed after, quite long after, a series of agreements in the 1970s, including the Helsinki Accords in 1975, that guaranteed borders and territorial integrity. So East Germany actually felt more secure externally before it fell apart in reunification. So this lesson can show us that probably one should not aim at a rapid reunification on southern terms, and one should not be afraid of providing North Korea with regime security, because that might exactly be what it needs in order to generate the reforms that we all want to see.
Certainly the international community would like to see this done in a peaceful manner. From your perspective, from your expertise, the path that things are going down right now seems to be headed to a dark place. What are the right steps to take to get to a brighter place, let's say?
I think it is engagement, rapprochement, and the main thing for externals is to not carry out sanctions that really hurt the North Korean population. only adopt sanctions that go against the interests of those directly responsible for the nuclear program. And this nuclear issue must not prevent engagement economically and socially. So the immediate object or aim now, I think, would be to reopen the Kaesong Industrial Park.
And how would you suggest the South, I guess, go about doing that?
There is, I can obviously understand that it is difficult for the government of South Korea to accept the North Korean approach, where North Korea wants to talk only with companies and individuals or civil society organizations, and in a way not recognize the South Korean government. So at the moment there is a little bit of a stalemate even in that matter. But that, I think, will be resolved. I really hope that some kind of formula will be found where it's possible to have either semi-official meetings with representatives on the same level on both sides, or purely official meetings in supplement, perhaps, to direct meetings with the companies.
President Park Geun-hye and U.S. President Barack Obama held a summit in May in Washington. The two leaders reaffirmed the unwavering alliance between Korea and the U.S. to serve as a linchpin of peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. Earlier this month, in informal talks between the U.S. and China, U.S. President Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to cooperate on North Korean issues. Recently, North Korea suggested talks with its neighboring countries. Japan recently sent a secret delegation to North Korea. And North Korea sent a special envoy to China.
6.15를 계기로 개성공업지구 정상화와 금강산 관광 재개를 위한 북남 당국 사이의 회담을 가질 것을 제의한다.
The North also suggested high-level talks with the South, but they were called off a day before they were to begin. And on June 17th, the North calls for a meeting with the U.S. to discuss a number of issues, including denuclearization. Different arguments have been made about the hidden agenda of North Korea, and how South Korea, the U.S., and China deal with the North is being watched with keen interest. This, of course, is not just an inter-Korean issue. There are other players involved here, China being one. What sort of message is going to come out to North Korea out of those two things?
North Korea has been afraid of that. And this must have given the North Koreans an idea that some kind of collusion or some kind of agreement would be made above their heads. I think the solution is not summitry for North Korea. The solution is quiet, silent rapprochement and economic social reform. A gradual approach in pursuance of the old sunshine policy, but not perhaps with the big summits. In fact, I like the term used by President Park, Trostpolitik.
When you look at China, though, and looking from afar, do you get a sense that they are losing patience with North Korea?
Oh, absolutely. China is really mad at North Korea for the nuclear program and for the threats. This has so many reasons. It could threaten China itself. And it also serves as a perfect reason for Japan, South Korea, the United States to establish missile defense, which could also, of course, be relevant against China. So China is extremely tired of what North Korea has been doing and is trying its best to instill change. But on the other hand, it's even more afraid that there would be a regime collapse. So that's why China still treads carefully.
And there's a speculation out there that China may be trying to support Kim Jongnam to take over control from Kim Jong-un. Do you make anything of that?
I don't know if there is anything in that speculation, but I would assume that if there is factional struggle in Pyongyang, which is quite likely, then it would be more about influencing Kim Jong-un than replacing him. Because this regime is built very much on the dynastic tradition from Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. So for someone, in a way, outside who's not been anointed by a father, it would be difficult to gain the kind of authority that the regime needs.
You mentioned the SixParty Talks a bit earlier. What do you make of those? Do you see any traction coming in the coming months or years for those talks?
I wouldn't exclude the possibility that they could open again, but that's not where I see the main hope, because my fear there is that it would just repeat what we've seen in the past. Perhaps there will be an agreement, and then the agreement will fall apart again. Because North Korea is not, I'm rather convinced of that, it's not willing to denuclearize completely, and that's what South Korea, Japan, United States, and also Russia and China want. So therefore there will be games being played all the time. The solution is to get around and instill sufficient security in the North Korean regime so it can start the reforms that will open up an internal process of change.
So in that respect then, do you see nuclear North Korea being more of a certainty than anything else that we've been hearing so far?
I think that as long as it has the present regime, it will retain its nuclear weapons. I'm not absolutely sure. It could be persuaded or pressured to abandon the nuclear weapons by China. But it's only if China really takes a very tough decision, a risky decision for China, which I don't think it will take. So unless that happens, then I think North Korea will remain nuclear, and we are in a way completely locked up if we then condition everything with North Korea on a solution to the nuclear issue. So that's why I think that although we must denounce and condemn and stay firm on the nuclear issue, we must at the same time engage.
President Park Geun-hye, in her address to the U.S. Congress, brought up this idea of a peace initiative in Northeast Asia. She invited North Korea to those talks, should they come. Do you think North Korea would respond positively to that?
The idea as such is good in principle, but North Korea would never respond positively to an initiative launched by the South Korean president in the United States. North Korea has always tried to sow cleavages between South Korea and the United States. I think the solution, if President Park really wants a Northeast Asia peace initiative, is to quietly approach North Korea, starting with the reopening of the Kaesong Industrial Park, and then if later an idea for a larger initiative could emerge from talks between North and South, so that it would be a common approach, or even one that was suggested by North Korea, then that would be the best way.
When you look at the situation here, are you more optimistic or more pessimistic about where things are going?
I'm at the moment rather pessimistic, because I have been disappointed to see what happened after Kim Jong-un took over. I thought that there was a chance for improvement, and many things have in fact gone worse. But where I see some hope is in what is happening economically between China and North Korea. There you have trade and investments, and this creates new social strata in the north. The only pity with this is that it draws North Korea into relations with China, while China also has strong relations with South Korea. And there is almost nothing left between North Korea and South Korea. So in a way, the two halves both get this close relationship with China without having to do with each other. So that's where I think it's urgent for South Korea to overcome its hesitation and engage again in spite of the nuclear problem.
The South Korean government has stressed the principles of inter-Korean dialogue under mutual trust. The Chinese government seems to consider North Korea as a debtor nation, not a strong ally. The leaders of South Korea and China are going to hold a summit next week. Sensitive issues like denuclearization, an inter-Korean summit, and the SixParty Talks are making the headlines these days. Can President Park Geun-hye and Chinese leader Xi Jinping help the Korean Peninsula enter a new phase? You talk about China being sort of the middleman in this situation, taking the benefits and also taking some of the heat from both sides. If you hypothetically were advising President Xi Jinping, which is a pretty big hypothetical, of course, but if you were, how would you advise China to sort of approach the situation?
I think this may be surprising, but I think that probably I would advise him to do more of what he's already done, but use more carrots and try to coordinate with South Korea economically, because China also has much to win from rapprochement on the Korean Peninsula. It could mean so much to the economic development of the whole region if the North Korean problem could get over and you could benefit from all the communications through the whole of Korea. So a plan for economic and social reform coordinated with South Korea, that's what I think that President Park and President Xi Jinping should discuss about, and perhaps not announce too much immediately, but put emphasis on the planning and the implementation afterwards.
You mentioned China using more carrot than stick. It seems these days they are reverting to the stick a bit here. Is that likely to backfire in any way? Is that likely to cause more problems here on the peninsula, in your opinion?
It could, but also when it comes to the nuclear issue, carrots don't work. Sticks don't work either, but perhaps sticks are at least needed against some of those who are directly involved with the nuclear program. You cannot just abandon all kinds of sanctions when North Korea is pursuing its program. And there are also concessions that North Korea could make. It could at least promise not to make any further nuclear tests. And there could perhaps be a moratorium on the missile tests. So these partial concessions must be obtained through a combination of carrots and sticks.
I asked you to hypothetically advise President Xi Jinping. I'm going to ask you to hypothetically advise President Park Geun-hye now. You mentioned earlier that you support her idea for a trust politic on the peninsula, though, but if you were advising her, how would you tell her to address all of these provocations and all of this rhetoric? What would you say to her?
As calmly as possible. Don't try to avoid creating crisis. Don't forget about trust politik and what you were advocating in the campaign. It's easy to forget now because it's so difficult to defend rapprochement when you still have the nuclear threat. But do that, be patient, build on the partial and positive achievements of the Sunshine Policy, and simply patiently pursue an Ostpolitik agenda, quietly but persistently.
That is the fear, though, right? As all of these provocations and rhetoric come out, that the government could forget about that idea, could forget about the trust politic. That's a definite concern, right?
Absolutely. I'm very concerned that that could happen.
Mr. Tønnesson, we do appreciate you being here and taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.